Good afternoon. Thank you for still being here. Our final lecture today is by Suvi Saarelainen. Suvi is a university lecturer in a School of Theology in the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Eastern Finland. She focused in her research a lot on meaning in life. But the great thing about Suvi's research is that she does not limit herself to the boundaries of her discipline. She's really crossing disciplines, looking to other fields, gaining knowledge there. And this makes her research incredibly rich and also layered with several layers within it. So it's a great honor to have you here, Suvi, and I'm looking forward to hear your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jessie. It's such an honor to be here today. I'm very grateful for you who are here today and those who are in online mode. This morning, I overheard Renee saying that you can give whatever title to the presenter and they will end up what is the content of a presentation. So I just made one small clarification to my title, and it's the question mark. Oh, okay. So here's the outline of my presentation. I'm going to be talking shortly about the religious capital. And perhaps I will suggest an idea that perhaps we would also need another capitals. This is linked to my discussion on meaning in life. Then I'm going to be shortly presenting our findings from the first COVID wave, because I believe that this was the paper which led to topic of the title for today. And after that, I'll present something from our mixed method research, focusing on well-being of the work employees from the Lutheran Church, and why it's important to know how the employees of the Lutheran Church are doing. That's because of the Finnish legislation. According to our national legislation, it is the job of the Lutheran Church to take care of the psychosocial well-being of all the Finnish citizens, and especially during the crisis time like COVID. And in the end of my presentation, I'm going to be showing some very recent findings. It's from my project that we've been gathering data from last autumn. So I'll give you some more recent findings from COVID stress and meaning in life. I will try to have some insights from this capital viewpoint in each section. So let's go for some theoretical underpinnings. The idea of capitals, it's quite economistic starting point. It's not something that in theology we would do every day. We don't really think aspects as mercy, salvation, or cross, something that you could trade, or that if you purchase your values, you get something back. But in some papers, especially in sociology of religion, there are discussions about religiousity as capital. And one point is that perhaps this is the economic language might be easier for some to take in, especially if you're not a believer. So therefore, it is like a language game that it's easier for others. And also in Bourdieu thinking, the starting point is that culture, it is also a significant capital in the way that culture is where we negotiate our values, and we also get so much from our culture. So we are products in our culture and in our everyday living. Social capital is something to do with your personal value, something that how you are being valued or seen by others. But in our paper, talking about religious capital, we also try to consider that we might need spiritual capital. If religious capital is something talking about explicit religiosity, we all know that there is more than explicit religiosity. So therefore, it might be beneficial to also talk about spiritual capital. So while I was doing this presentation, not a day earlier, I started thinking, do we need an existential capital? That's my area of research, I would say. I'm sure that many of you know Signpost paper written by Peter Lacour and Niels Christian Weed about existential domains in healthcare or in health crises. The starting point for their theoretical paper is that in current secular countries or secular context, there are spheres that are very close or parallel to each other, depending on the worldview of the individual. So if there is no connection to God, one has a secular standpoint to living. But there might be that there are religious people whose personal faith interact in their everyday living, and of course also in crisis situation. And then there's spiritual sphere for, well, spiritual views. But the main point of the paper is that in health crises, these spheres are like to intersect, and everything is linked to meaning making. No matter what is the personal status or faith or religious background of the individual, in health crises, we are driven to meaning making process. Or at least that is something that I found in my doctoral dissertation. This is something that I did a few years back. I originally, well, I'm a very narrative person. I love qualitative studies, and this is one of the main findings from the study in which I interviewed young people with cancer, and I spent some years to focusing on how they find life as meaningful, whether religiosity played a part in their coping process, and what else was significant. So I discovered that it was like this pole between despair and hope, in which they were trying to find meaning in their life. They were trying to make sense of the life crisis. And for today, I also consider, it says that occurrence of cancer, but when talking about COVID, I started thinking that perhaps this model also works if it's another health crisis. And I was quite sure that it should be like this. If you consider what makes your life as meaningful. For me, this picture talks so strongly about meaning in life. Can you guess why? What is your suggestion? I'm not sure whether you see meaning in this, but I do should see. What? Yes, please. Any ideas? Freedom. Sorry?
To enjoy your children?
Yes, yes. Enjoy.
Vitality?
Yes, vitality. Colors. Yes, on a way. Direction. Nature, very important. So for so many.
I think he's running
towards something, yes. Yes, and for me, if we take a careful look at the picture, we can see that there's trees. So for the trees, there's roots. So for me, there's also rootedness in this picture somehow. So all of these elements are sources of meaning in life. We all have personal sources that provide meaning, meaningfulness, or fulfillingness, depending on your view. Also, Martela and Steger write about the three meanings of meaning, and they say that it's direction, coherence, significance. And of course, it's easy for us to understand that belonging is one important component also. Unfortunately, we also meet moments like this, don't we? And then when we meet the crisis of meaning or violation of meaning, we might feel that life is frustrating, empty. There's nothing there. And in these moments, we are likely to be driven to meaning-making process. We want to maintain the experience of meaning. So from these theoretical starting points, when studying COVID, and for this presentation, I want to consider what is the role of religion as a capital during the COVID pandemic and how different existential capitals become vivid. So let me introduce you to the international study, which I had a small role. But if we take a moment and try to think back early 2020. So early 2020 was the time when COVID was mainly, at least in my point of view, from the Finnish point of view, it was a virus going on in Italy and Spain, nothing to do with Finland. And on that time, I was contacted by Professor Luis Oviedo. He's a theologian working in Italy with Spanish background. And he sent me an email that it would be really nice to gather COVID-related data from Finland. Well, COVID is not here, sure, we can do it. And he was like having an idea that we should have data from Spanish, Italian, Finland, and perhaps something in between to see what's happening, because the COVID came to Finland in a few weeks of time. And this is something that we can see the numbers early 2020. I think this is like April or May 2020. So we could see that Italy was way, Italy and Spain had very different figures that in Poland and Finland. So then Luis also invited a team from Poland to join in, just based on the spreading of the virus and how it impacted in our societies. On that time, Finland was doing quite in a different way than the other countries. But also these countries has very different religious background. And just, I'm not going to go through the details, but just to give you the glimpse idea that the religiosity was very different in these countries. Because this was a study linked to some of the PhD projects run in Italy and Spain, the measurement or the scale was quite explorative, but there was scale development done by Oviedo and his team. I don't know that many details about that. Then there was some other empathy and compassion scale that they developed earlier, but then also scales that we probably all know quite well. Some items from Tatiana Schnell's Sources of Meaning and Meaning in Life, and brief ARCOPE, but very brief in this version. And Likert scale from 1 to 5. It was an online sample through social media, with the Finnish peculiarity was that we had to close down the questionnaire quite soon because media was so interested. So in a few days, we had hundreds of Finnish people answering to the questionnaire, and we were still in trouble of starting the data gathering in other countries. But altogether, we ended up having 1,162 answers in some weeks. I think we would have reached that number only from Finland in few weeks, but we decided to kind of to try to find a balance even a bit. So here we are just to see that some basic ideas that were done for the data. It's skewed as often in these samples are if it's social media sample, and I guess it's very vivid that when theologians try to do social media research, you get people through the social media contacts. So very religious people, basically, who ended up answering to this. And also well-educated people, mainly female participants. But this is a paper that's written by Berenika, and this is part of her doctoral dissertation. If you're interested to see what she did and how she studied religious capital, especially from the viewpoint of church attendance, you can just Google it up and it's fully available. But just to give the glimpse idea of the paper, she studies how church attendance worked, and she took only parts of the questionnaire to make it more coherent and make it more reliable. But she found that church attendance supported faith provided meaning in life. She also found that praying became more important during the pandemic, praying for like intercession, the knowing that other people are praying for me was found important, but also she found that praying for myself and the health of the others was found important. She also found that personal spirituality played a role. And she also found that those who had a high score in church attendance seemed to have a more empathic attitude toward others. So there's something in church attendance that gives these other values also importance in life. Then with my student, we played a bit with, so now this is not published, this is more of a play. We played with the whole data to see how the meaning related items were correlated with rest of the data. And just to give you a glimpse idea, but we found that there was a positive correlation between religious commitment and meaningfulness. We also found that we heard like from the previous lecture that there is a connection between high religiosity and spiritual struggles. So we did detect that also in our data, because when the meaning, loss of meaning appeared, it was closely linked to being with the item being abandoned by God. And this was something that was especially detected among Polish participants. So yes, we could see earlier that Poland scored high in religious attendance and religiosity and that type of explicit religiosity. Also, this data set gave an idea that religious people found life as meaningful, more meaningful than others. Then spiritual but not religious found life a bit more meaningful than people who said that identified themselves not as religious people. So the first pandemic wave was generally found very meaningful time in life. And this was actually the fact that was found in several studies conducted in Europe at that time. But if you take items linked to COVID stress or depression or other difficulties, then you know that those scored high, but still experience of meaning seem to remain quite stable. If you're interested, I think there was a study, Danish study conducted by Peter Lacour and Heidi Pedersen, shows that especially that meaningfulness remained quite stable, but other difficulties did arise. We also found that older you get, more meaningful you felt. And it was quite interesting because there was so many discussions what happened for the older people, like people shut down to their houses. But from the US study, we could see that during the first pandemic wave, people became so empathic and they were so aware of older generations staying at home. So the neighborhood help was activated, strongly activated. So for a short period of time, it could be that the older generation was actually doing quite well. At least those who were staying at their private houses. We know that in nursing homes, the situation was quite different. But we also see that the level of education has a strengthening aspect. So on the other hand, if you are low educated, you would be more likely to be in trouble during the COVID. At least something like that could be said. And countries in Finland, of course, the situation with COVID was so mild at that time. And also the general discussions, people were so happy with our government. We had a government like full of female power. All the leading parties, like the representatives of the parties were female, younger than me. And it was like all the Power Five in all our social media, and people were really happy, and we were happy about the restrictions, and we were happy for the government, and we were happy about everything, and we felt that we're in the same boat, and it's just we're gonna have to take one summer and then the COVID is over. But it wasn't it? It's still here. So perhaps to sum up this part from the viewpoint of religious capital, study confirms or let us to think that religion provides a strong anchor for meaningfulness. It's not a new finding, even though this was quite religious sample. But from the viewpoint of existential capital, we saw that COVID shakes the experience of meaningfulness among young people, or that was like something that we considered that could be detected from the data, and that this is something that we can confirm in our current studies. There was a study conducted by Finnish Research Center of the Church, and it found that especially among young people, mortality salience grew in that sense that they became aware of personal mortality and death. And it was something agonizing and something that kept occupying their mind already during the first pandemic wave. Okay, I'm gonna hurry up a bit. So I gave you the glimpse peek why to study this well-being of the work of the employees of the Lutheran Church. So it is actually statute in legislation of the church is confirmed by the government, and government is the one who takes care of the church legislation, and it is still there. And this is something that was such a burden, probably still is, for the employees of the church, knowing that it is something that is stated in law, that you should have to take care of the social well-being. But also when the restriction started, it was Thursday. So can you imagine that on Sunday, every single church in Finland was streaming the services from Thursday till Sunday. Not that much of an education. They were buying crazy amount of stuff to be able to stream on Sunday. But I think it was something like 98% of the congregations were doing this. So it would be easy to say that the digital leap was fast and unpredictable. Yes. So we wanted to see what happened in this area. Well, actually, I was contacted by one of the bishop's offices asking that could you do a small survey to see what is going on and how the employees are doing. And I'm sure that many of you don't know. So this is the background of the Finns at the moment. Even though the membership rate has been going rapidly down, still 60 8% of the Finns are the members of the Lutheran Church, and then there's a couple percents who belong to Orthodox Church, and then basically that is two most biggest religious affiliations in Finland. But only for the Lutheran Church, there's 378 churches. So you can do the math how many streaming services there were on Sunday. And quite big number of permanent employees. So we sent out questionnaires for the different areas in diocese, depending on which deans of the diocese wanted us to become involved in the study, and also then they put the questionnaire link to the Facebook group for the employees. So this is the measurements that we use, well-known measurements, mainly meaningfulness of work, meaningfulness of life, burnout symptoms, and then also the universities of Finland had built this questionnaire about well-being at work during exceptional circumstances. So we have nearly 400 participants, and we also had 2 open-ended questions. So most of them answered at least one open-ended questions. And here you can see where we got the responses. And just a quick notions from the quantitative part. It seemed, and this was gathered June 2020. So work ability remained quite high. We were quite surprised how high, and burnout symptoms were not that very prevalent, but still you can see that there's large standard deviation. So we could see that there's something going on there. Roughly 30% reported having burnout symptoms. But then you could say, well, 70% they were doing well. But if you stop to consider, 30% were not doing well. And this was only 2 months after the work had changed. And the issue is that they are still in the constant change of the work, and there hasn't been really doing that much for the well-being of the employees. We also found out that women experienced more meaningfulness in life than men. But women also experienced exhaustion more. And also it seemed that if you had many years in your work, you were more likely to do better during the change of the work. And well-being was higher when you were older. I'm gonna quickly go to qualitative stuff. So this is something that we see what happened. Location of the work, of course, but then the digitalization, that was huge theme. New job content and the amount of work. And you can see always it's like pluses and minuses. So it was very mixed, the experiences. Positive changes, enhanced connection. Because they were phoning so much, they called to every single one, or at least the older people, and then the young people who were they afraid of. So they kept phoning and phoning and phoning, and then they started doing stuff like bringing groceries or taking medication. And for the younger generation who were stayed at home, they made like play packages or extra stuff. So enhanced connections. But then, of course, and the excitement. Finally, there's a meaning in my job. Finally, I know what I'm doing. Finally, I know what for. So it was felt that there was meaning in the job in a new way. It's easier to take care of the working hours. I don't hear that often, but some of them did. And possibility to care for preparation, because some tasks were not there anymore. and personal abilities to learn, to do new stuff. That was found as exciting as well. And working technology was found very inspiring. But of course, there's another side of everything. My job description fully changed. My work has clearly been more stressful and heavier than usual. I don't get connection. I miss my Parisian. I miss my colleagues. There's nothing there that used to be the same. The technique doesn't work. I don't reach people, and stream is just collapsing. I think one of the biggest issues was management problems. For instance, if one had asthma or other severe medical condition, it wasn't taken care of, that they could still say that, no, you have to go to the services, you have to do this and this and this. So they felt that they were not safe themselves. That was one of the biggest issues. And of course, then the long hours, 12 to 15 hours without breaks. So too much. And then the mixed emotions were both end. And this is something written. I understand the importance of my work, especially at this exceptional time. It feels like it's important to be there, to bring comfort, encouragement, and hope to people right now. So very meaningful work. But in the midst of all this, I also felt that taking care of the well-being of us employees has been overtaken by the state of emergency. We have been left out in the midst of the confusion, alone, without knowledge and tools to respond to changing situation. It is not enough for me to write a few more detailed biblical phrases as a final threat of an email. So it seems that for the religious people, religious professionals, religious capital was simple not enough. They would have needed more. So the data is kind of mixed, because 70% of the open-ended responses talk about these emotional difficulties. So perhaps the summary is that the large deviation lets us to understand that people who were doing worse were really doing worse, even though some of them were doing quite well. And just to add up, they would have perhaps needed more profound existential and practical support, as the religious biblical phrases were not enough. Perhaps their religious and spiritual questions were not answered either, because it was considered that they are the profs who know how to deal with these issues. As the time is running and I'm fully aware the situation at Schiphol, I want to take us to the study 3. This is something that I'm working with my project. We have a funding provided by Emil Aaltonen Foundation, which gave me an opportunity to employ 2 postdocs for 3 years of time. And then I have a PhD student also working with this, and some research assistants as well. So based on the very explorative study we did on the first wave, I also wanted to, it kept occupying my mind that perhaps with different measurements we would have reached something more, and we would know actually more about meaning in life and COVID stress also. But for this particular study, it's firstly linked to existential well-being of the older people. And just now we are gathering the data among pensioners, and what I'm about to present, it's linked to people, younger people. And perhaps I'll get to some notions from among the older people as well. But I'm sure that many of you know Tatiana Schnell's work in Sources of Meaning and Meaning in Life. That's the questionnaire that was translated and validated in 29 languages. And I'm quite sure that our study is the 13th. So this is a very long questionnaire focusing on meaning, sources of meaning, basically. It talks about meaning in life and sources of meaning. But due to COVID stress, we were also eager to know how it impacts the meaning, experience of meaning. So therefore, we've been developing this small scale, looking different aspects of COVID. And this is the original Schnell's Sources of Meaning and Meaning in Life, and how the different dimensions are covered with 151 items. And I think for the Finnish study, we're still struggling with the model fit. And I think our suggestion will look quite different. Well, not quite different, but it seems that we're going to follow Norwegian example by Dorgeisen and colleagues, or even better fit in Finnish data would suggest 7 dimensions instead of 5, but let's not go into detail in that. But for the validation of the questionnaire, we have 551 participants. Again, many women were eager to take part. And this is also a well-educated sample because we were mainly targeting people at the university. Here you can see the age distribution. And at the moment, we are gathering data from pensioners and focusing on that side. But what I'm presenting next, it's not from that sample. We also distributed age from the younger part to 2 pillars, because theory suggests that there might be different difficulties for younger, like young adults, and that's something that we want to see. I'm not going to go into details of analysis today. I will just give you an idea what is going on in the data, and perhaps just to quickly show you some tests. What we see with t-test, with Kruskal-Wallis, experience of meaningfulness and how it varies in age, just to give you an idea that younger you are, less meaningfulness. Older you get, it goes up until you reach 70. The sample is really small in this, but if we would have added the sample from 65 to 96, I believe that's the oldest participant at the moment, we would see the same curve again. And what happens? Crisis of meaning. Again, it would be nice to be in this area from the perspective of COVID stress. Also, and crisis of meaning because it's less in the middle age. And when looking this coherence, some variable, we can see that coherence goes up. I'm not sure what happens when we put the older generation here. Coherence theoretically should go up older you get, but let's see what happens. And then the COVID stress. So from the perspective of COVID stress, you don't really want to be very young, but not very old either. And I think this is something that will show also when we put the older generation in. And when we see the correlations between COVID stress, so this is now only for the Finnish sample, if I didn't say it very clearly. What supports of not having COVID stress, kind of supports meaningfulness, connection to nature, health orientation, explicit religiosity, and of course meaningfulness. But what is difficult, according to our tests? Social engagement. So perhaps that's something that we know, that we need relationality to feel life as meaningful. And that's one of the first aspects that was cut down due to COVID. But also self-knowledge. And this is something that it's a bit of puzzling. How come self-knowledge is closely linked to COVID stress? Perhaps if you are very careful in your thinking and I don't know, this is something that we are still looking at. But also when looking the different sources, we know that self-knowledge is linked to COVID stress and health orientation is associated with lower levels, and explicit religiosity is linked to lower levels of COVID stress. So explicit religiosity seemed to protect against the crisis of meaning caused by COVID stress. So I think this is something that then puts the question mark to the end of my title, because among younger people, explicit religiosity was lower. So in that way, religious capital is something that it's not available in the current value system of the younger Finnish. So perhaps it's something that's it's not protective, because it's something else that they build on their values than explicit religiosity. So age was a significant background variable for the COVID stress. Younger you are, more you have the stress. And also the gender. Women seem to experience COVID stress more. And I will just show you the numbers. I'm not going to go through. And also, again, we see that the level of education plays a part. If you are well educated, less stress you are likely to see. And also work situation. If you have a permanent job, it seems to support or protect from COVID stress. Perhaps just one point from this slide. So I said that women experience more COVID-related stress than men, perhaps because women are more socially in commitment. But just 2 days ago, my postdoc phoned me that, can you believe I found something very interesting? That it seems that when men have COVID stress, that is more likely to lead to crisis of meaning for men instead of women. So this is something that it's very, very something in our hands. I cannot really explain that yet, but we are wondering that perhaps because in Finland it was such a big news that men are more likely to die to COVID. So that might be one explanation, but we don't know all the details yet. So I'm looking at the clock and then just say for religious capital for the section. So the religiosity is not protecting for the younger generation due to changes in values. But also it seems that spirituality does not have the same type of protective power as explicit religiosity does. Also, it's quite easy for us to understand that young people are so vulnerable due to their identity development process, and they really need social connections to form their mature identity from young adulthood to mature adulthood. To sum up, this is again a wordplay I said in the beginning. So perhaps religious capital, it is something that is supportive that we can see from both studies, study 1 and 3. It is an asset for others, not for all. And for pros religious prose. There's need more than just religious capital. Spiritual capital, if I may use that word, it's a bit inconsistent between studies 1 and 3, but I think that's mainly because the measurements are so different. But from the study 1, we could see meditating and yoga has a potential to support meaningfulness. Correlations are small, but it was still there. And especially the study 3 showed the huge importance of the nature. But then, after these 3 days in this conference, I think we should be talking about existential capital, because that would allow us to consider the existential needs and meaning-related needs of different people from different background. And we see that the COVID really threatens the meaning system, especially now that it's been going on for such a long time. So to be able to provide support systems and to provide people who are shaken by the COVID stress, I suggest, and based on these wonderful lectures that we hear, that we should be also considering the existential capital and how we could provide support for those in need due to COVID. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Suvi.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suvi, for your presentation. I'm really impressed by the amount of data that you were able to gather during the pandemic. I'm wondering, are there any questions in the audience? Clarifications, comments? Maybe in the chat? Something in the chat?
Thank you for sharing this beautiful research with us. And it also emphasizes the need that we take care of the spiritual caregivers. Maybe come back these days. I want to problematize a bit the term capital, not for the instance of religion. From a spiritual point of view, I'm not certain, but from an existential point of view, what would be existential capital when there was no existential concern? What would life be without death? So making a logical theory about too much or too little capital from an existential point of view, I think is, from a normative point of view, difficult. But of course, I agree with you that there is a significant domain people enter into. But the burden is not the same as if it is a loss.
Yes, you're completely right. And I think the no, it works. It takes a while. So I think you're completely right. And I think this is more of a language game that I started thinking while doing this presentation. But coming from Finland, I think this is one of the individual papers that been impacting to my thinking a lot, because in Finland, we heard yesterday Helena talking about whether it is okay to speak about religiosity in Sweden. And I think in Finland, the issue, it's okay to talk as a theologian. I can go and ask that, what do you think about religion and whether it makes any impact in your life? And that's clear. People can say whatever they want. But then the term spirituality, when you transfer that to Finnish, it's a term that fully belongs to the church. So in Finnish, it's not transfer, like, it's really tricky to use the word spirituality. And we don't have the word that would grasp the English term. So I think in Finland, it would make sense to talk also about existential capital, but it would need much more work. So I fully agree with you. And it was more of a gameplay that started from this figure. And then I'm thinking that perhaps if we take the meaning discussion also to this capital discussion, that we find a new aspects. But also from Veronica's paper, you will find that also she comes to a conclusion that religious capital is not an easy term to use either. And it's difficult to, do we really want to use the economic language in this type of discourse? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Gentlemen in the back, please. It is, needs some concentration. Again, I want to answer then, because now I follow you better with your point. We have in the Netherlands the same struggle or similar struggle with the word spirituality. And some of us associate that term with paranormality or parapsychological things. And again, with an normative judgment. And that leads to a lot of sensitive reactions. So that's difficult. We now attach to the term meaning in life, zingeving, which is not the same as meaning in life, zingeving. So we are really in search of words, for meaning,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any more questions or comments? Yeah.
I noticed when you're looking at the young people that they had greater social isolation or more aware of it. And yet we normally think of them as being more socially connected with the media, cell phones, everything else.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's kind of reverse. I know in the United States, most people think they had greater social connections, but I always thought that was not true.
Yeah. Yes.
Are you seeing that?
Indeed, I've been quite much involved in different kind of discussions linked to this topic, especially people under 25. And I think like in Finland, we see the drug use going up in certain areas, and starting earlier than it used to be. And we see different kind of gang fights that's never happened in Finland before. So the ill-being of the young people, it's really there. And it's, even though the COVID would end like this, the social and these mental difficulties, they're gonna be there 5 years, 10 years, for a long time. And we have a whole generation, like my niece who graduated today from high school. She spent only a few days in high school because she was like in the first grade, yes, second grade, no. And now she went to do the tests. So, and now she's going to start a university next year, hopefully in campus. But at our campus, people are not coming because they feel they are not leaving their houses. Young students are staying. They rather take the Zoom because there's too much fatigue, too much isolation in too long time. So they are not responding at the moment. That's my reflection from the as a university lecturer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Suvi. I know that you need to catch planes. So just that we finish up. Thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.